"Get up and go to Nineveh, that great city, and declare against it the proclamation that I am commanding you." And Jonah got up and went to Nineveh, according to the Lord's word. Now Nineveh was indeed an enormous city, a 3 days' walk across. Jonah started into the city, walking one day, and he cried out, "Just 40 days more, and Nineveh will be overthrown." And the people of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast and put on mourning clothes, from the greatest of them to the least significant. When word of it reached the king of Nineveh, he got up from his throne, stripped himself of his robe, covered himself with mourning clothes, and sat in ashes. Then he announced, in Nineveh, by decree of the king and his officials, neither human nor animal, cattle nor flock will taste anything, no grazing and no drinking water. Let humans and animals alike put on mourning clothes, and let them call upon God forcefully. And let all persons stop their evil behavior and the violence that's under their control. He thought, who knows? God may see this and turn from his wrath so that we might not perish. God saw what they were doing, and they had ceased their evil behavior. So God stopped planning to destroy them, and he didn't do it. Has anyone heard a fisherman tell a big fish story? You know, the more you hear talk about the fish, the bigger and bigger the fish gets. Well, Jonah is literally and figuratively a big fish story. The book is full of literary techniques such as satire, exaggerations, hyperboles, allegories, and symbolism. But you know, what I remember about Jonah growing up is the story of Jonah and the whale. Of course, it doesn't say it's a whale. The Hebrew translation is a big fish. However, when we reduce Jonah down to just another big fish story or a children's tale, we're not doing it the justice it deserves. There is so much more to the book. The Book of Jonah is really rich, full of themes, and it doesn't have just one theme. Like some of the major themes are reconciliation and redemption, tension between God's grace and mercy, God's love for all people. God is universal, and that you can't run from God where you're calling. So let's take a look at what Jonah's story might look like if it were told today. Let's say Jonah just got out of seminary. He just graduated, and he is convinced that his calling is going to be to pastor at a local church. However, Jonah gets a message from God. In fact, he's told to preach to the people of Mosul in Iraq. For those of you who don't know, Mosul is only like less than an hour from Nineveh. Nineveh is right outside, less than an hour's drive. I've actually been to Mosul and Nineveh. Now, and also, ISIS controls that territory, Mosul. And just like the Assyrians, the Assyrians were known for their violence and brutality in biblical times. Well, like that, ISIS is known for, the violence and brutality today. So this is the last place Jonah wants to go. I mean, in his mind, Mosul was full of terrorists that they just want to be heading. So Jonah decides he's not going to do it. He gets on a bus, and he decides to flee west from here. He starts heading west. He makes it to about the Appalachian Mountains. Then the weather starts to get bad. The bus skids on ice, and it almost flips over. The storm turns into a blizzard. So the bus driver is getting pretty superstitious and thinking something strange is going on. So he stops, and he demands to know, who is responsible. Well, Jonah confesses, and he proclaims the power of God. Well, Jonah gets tossed off the bus, and the weather calms down. So now Jonah is wandering in the mountains until he falls into a cave where he's trapped for 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah cries out and begs for mercy. A light appears in the cave, and Jonah is able to see the way out. God informs Jonah once again, look, you're going to go to preach to the people of Nineveh and Mosul. So a helicopter picks Jonah up and drops him off at the airport. Then he gets a flight to Iraq and lands in Baghdad. He takes a bus to Mosul. When he gets there, he heads into the center of the city and proclaims, 40 days more, and Mosul shall be overthrown. The people start to pray to God for mercy. Shortly after, even the leader of ISIS himself steps out and declares his intent to turn from injustice and evil. Of course, Jonah does not think these people should be forgiven. Jonah, being an American patriot, loves his country, and we're at war with these people, so he just can't understand why God would want to do this. In fact, this is why he ran to begin with. He just knew God was going to forgive these people, and he didn't like that. So he goes off to cry, out in the desert. God has mercy on Jonah and provides him with shade. Jonah really, it's hot, and Jonah starts to really, love this little tree that's giving him shade. But then God lets the tree die. And Jonah starts to grieve so much that he just wants to die. I mean, he's just so miserable. God has forgiven the people he hates, and now his only comfort and shelter is dead. But the Lord said, "You pitied the shrub for which you didn't work and which you didn't raise. It grew in a night, and it perished in a night. Yet for my part, can't I pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 people who can't tell their right hand from the left, and also so many animals?" Jonah in the Bible was a patriot. Now, he loved his country of Israel first. We have to remember that the Israelites suffered at the hands of the Assyrians. So we have to understand why, Jonah struggled with God showing these people mercy. However, God is merciful, and he's about redemption and reconciliation. And redemption and reconciliation go hand in hand. The Old Testament is full of such examples. God offered David forgiveness despite the horrible things he did. He accepted the Israelites back no matter how many times they turned against him. In fact, God goes out of his way to redeem lost souls, like Luke 15:4-7, where the shepherd rejoices over the one lost sheep rather than the 91 who did not stray. It's understandable that there would be tension between God's grace and justice. Humanity longs for justice, and it does not seem right when our oppressors, are left off the hook. However, we all fall short of God's glory. So it suddenly feels different when you are the one in need of forgiveness. You could say, throw away the key all you like, until suddenly you're the one facing prison time for your own crime. God's capacity for forgiveness does not have borders. God's love does not stop at borders either. In fact, the greatest commandment is to love God and our neighbors. And Deuteronomy 10:19 commands us to love foreigners as well. This leads to the theme of God being, in fact, universal. God is a God of all of creation. His reign does not stop at any nation's borders. If Jonah were around today, he would probably have embraced that term, God and country. Many Christian fundamentalists today in the U.S. have a philosophy similar to Jonah. They believe that God's love and mercy only applies to the United States, and somehow that we are more deserving of God's love. Modern-day Israel has this issue too. Some Israeli nationalists do not believe that God's love and mercy extends to Palestine. Finally, because God is in fact universal, you cannot run from God. In ancient Israel, the pagans followed gods that reigned over various territories and regions of different aspects. So theoretically, you could go to another god's territory. You cannot do this with God. How many of you have said something like, God, I will do anything that you ask me to, but please, not that? We all have that one thing that we do not want to do. For Jonah, it was preaching to the Assyrians. I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian household. There was a lot of talk about hellfire and brimstone at church. I am still recovering from wounds from that experience. I know if God asked me to go and preach at a fundamentalist church right now, I don't know, or go back to my childhood church. I don't know. I might run the other direction. Jonah grew up during a time when Assyrian oppression and violence, against the Israelites was rampant. You can date the setting around the 8th century, where Jonah, he's mentioned in Kings as the son of Amittai around the time of Jeroboam. So that was around the height of Assyrian oppression. So in Jonah's mind, the thought of, God redeeming these Assyrians has disgusted him. We can relate, as much as we say love and forgive those who have harmed us, it is always easier said than done. Not only is it hard to forgive, but sometimes it's just downright inconvenient to be called to do God's work. We do not want to leave our comfortable worlds. I can imagine Jonah was happy at home and was not happy to see his life interrupted. God has a way of bringing us back to our calling whenever we get too comfortable or try to run. Now, this theme of running from our destiny or calling is common today in film or literature. Take a look at Star Wars. Luke is always talking about how he wants to get off this rock and how he wants to see the galaxy. But when Obi-Wan Kenobi offered him the opportunity to go, he starts coming up with all these excuses, like, oh, I've got work to do here, I don't like the Empire, but there's nothing I can do about it. Quickly he just completely backed out. It took fate taking his course and Luke losing his family before he decided to follow his destiny. Yet God had to get pretty heavy-handed with Jonah, too. Many scholars have tried to debate exactly what type of literature the Book of Jonah is. It's actually listed as a prophetic book, and Jonah is considered a prophet. But unlike most other prophecies, it's actually a narrative. It tells a story. And Jonah is not your typical prophet because, the other prophets do what they're supposed to do. They follow God's instruction, and Jonah rebels. The book is described also as a parable, fable, or satire. The book does, in fact, several carry prophetic messages, though. Miguel Ture, in Liberating Jonah, reminds us that you cannot really love God, yet hate your neighbor. Ture goes on to cite several liberation theology motifs in the Book of Jonah. In reality, you can't be liberated as long as you have this hate in your heart. When we hate our enemies and our oppressors, we're holding ourselves in bondage. Plus, Jonah and the other prophets all share the message that no one is beyond redemption. So let's look at what if the book is in fact satire. We have to ask who's the subject of the satire. Satire is making fun of somebody, but also making a point. David Marcus in Balaam to Jonah, anti-prophetic satire in the Hebrew Bible, actually goes into a lengthy discussion about the possibility that Jonah could just be satire. Jonah makes some absurd decisions, like thinking he can run from God. And in fact, Jonah admits he knows God controls all the heavens and earth, so it's not like he really thought he could run from God. So I suppose the satire could be about the ridiculous lengths we go to run from our calling. Or it could be that the target of the satire was Israel. Israel screwed up over and over and ran from God's command and calling, yet of course God never stopped loving them and continued to offer them mercy. Yet, Israel still doesn't, love its neighbors or forgive its enemies. Just like we don't do that here well either. The common description given to the Book of Jonah is it's also a parable. A parable is a story used to give a moral or spiritual lesson. I would say Jonah fits that definition. It's full of lessons, as I mentioned before. The book certainly has its fill of satire, so it's rich in a lot of literary techniques. So it could be parable or satire, both. But the thing most of us get caught up in, especially growing up, is this big fish or whale. We don't know what the big fish symbolizes. Theories range from Israel to the underworld. Some people think, Jonah actually died and he spent 3 days in the underworld. We do know that when we disobey God, we get swallowed up into all sort of chaos and problems. It could be swallowed by a fish, just means lost at sea. We don't know the euphemisms of the time. Jonah can be read on multiple levels. So to get hung up on the fish, it just gives the book a disservice. There's a lot of issues with atheists that challenge the belief in God, and they quote Jonah. Jonah is a book they talk about, how ridiculous that is to believe, a man got swallowed by a whale. However, I don't think the story is meant to be taken literally, but it does not change the powerful themes of Jonah. Which are reconciliation and redemption, God's grace and mercy, God's love for all people. God is universal, and you can't run from God. So the next time you run from your calling, ask yourself if that is really the way to show that you love God and your neighbor. Are you showing your love for your church family here at Wedgewood? Are you running from your calling to serve your family here? Has God given you a gift or talent that can help you and that can help your church family that you're ignoring? So let's go beyond our comfort level, even if it is inconvenient. Otherwise, we might find ourselves telling many big fish stories to get out of a big mess. Amen.